This book I've been studying is extremely thorough, and with some concern that I might go on too long with this topic, I thought, well, maybe I should skip some pieces of it. And I almost did it this week, a chapter called Money Talks. I thought, well, I'll just kind of pass lightly through that. Until Monday morning, when money was screaming loudly at me. It is true that money talks. Now, there's all kinds of sayings about that, some not quite so polite, but most of the sayings I found about that they say that money talks, but all mine ever says is goodbye. That's some of the nicest ways it's said, but it seems like it's always leaving. And while I was thinking about treading lightly over this section, at that very same time, my computer was being hacked and I was almost scammed out of all of our money. It does talk. And when somebody's about to steal all of it, it screams. You know, typically money is saying what to us, or not to all of us, but to many people, money is saying, buy it, buy it, buy it. But when somebody's stealing it, it seemed to be screaming, save me, save me. It's amazing how loudly money talks. It's talking to all of us, isn't it? You know, the other day I even showed Dina, I found an old car online that I'd like to have, and I suppose if we decided to, we could have it. And on one hand, money says to me, buy it, buy it, buy it, but since I already have enough vehicles, why do I need another one? You know, whether we care to admit it or not, our money is right now speaking a message directly to our hearts, isn't it? You generally say, what? It's just paper. I'm not quite to that point yet. I'm not quite to that point yet. But it also speaks directly to our Lord about the condition of our heart, or the devotion of our heart. Because money indeed talks, we best be careful how we interpret the words. Listen to what it says and how you respond to it. For example, Solomon, you remember what he said before he became much older and wiser in the younger days when he was seeking to attain more and more of everything he thought he wanted? He says in Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 19, money is the answer to everything. Money is the answer to everything. It's like, why don't you just throw money at it? Well, money to Solomon at that time would say, I've got it, I can use it, so buy it. You know, money, still today, to many people, money says, buy it. Why? Because you deserve it. Just buy it. You know, money says it's going to be such a thrill. You ever get a thrill out of spending it, Jeff? I don't think that's your mindset. But there's a great many people, let's go to the mall and spend money. That's a thrill. And get doing what you want will make you happy. However, when Solomon's wealth and his possessions failed to make him happy, the much wiser Solomon said, Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves its abundance from its income, or from its gain, or from its benefits. You got all this money, and you expect to enjoy all of its benefits. Well, let's just ask the question, does money answer everything? Answer everything? Let's think about it in this way. Regarding benevolence, money may be the immediate answer. Sometimes it is. But it's not the lasting remedy, is it? It's not the lasting remedy for someone who is continually seeking more, or someone who is a careless steward of their money. You know, Jeff, you and I have talked about sometimes there are people who are legitimately poor, and there's those people who just have poor ways. They don't know how to manage what they have. But on the other hand, James, we remember, rebukes those who have much, but who have hoarded it and oppressed the poor. It's in James chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. James chapter 5, verse 3 through 5. You know, the topic there certainly would go with the rest of the letter of James, those who are showing favoritism, and yes, they would care for some whom they favor, and they would let others go hungry or what. But he rebukes them for that in James chapter 5. Verse 3, your gold and silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh like fire. In other words, it's going to witness against you, and it's also going to condemn you. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. In other words, you're investing yourself in this life, not the next life. In these last days when you ought to be making preparation for heaven, you're just preparing for the best time you can have in this life. And certainly by that they would be condemned. Verse 4, behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived luxuriously on earth, and led a life of wanton pleasure, and you have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You will be condemned, but to death, the righteous man. He does not resist you. He's not condemning enjoying your money, is he? But the excess of it. You've lived luxuriously. And even if you had some of the finer things of life, not necessarily a problem either, but this wanton pleasure.
But they did it on the backs of their laborers.
Yeah.
And they were the ones paying.
So it's all dishonest gain in God's sight. And certainly they'll be condemned. And so, since money talks, do we know what it's saying to us? It speaks of where our heart is, doesn't it? Matthew chapter 6 and verse 21. As soon as we go to Matthew chapter 6, we know we're in the application section from the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5. Now the body of the sermon is fairly brief. The Beatitudes amount to an introduction, and chapter 6 is the application. Matthew 6, verse 21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's interesting how emphatically he says that. As the heart and the treasure are becoming one. Where one is, the other is, they become one. It's such that, really, when you put it together, your heart's treasure is what you are. Those people in James who became rich on the backs of others and enjoyed all this excessive pleasure. Their heart's treasure is what they are. And James says, because of what they are, they will be condemned. So what and where and how and when we spend our money really is like a first-person eyewitness testimony of what we treasure most. It reminded me, Dean, of when we lived down in Texas. There was a foster child who came to stay with us who was abused and malnourished. And his mother would spend no ends of money on their fancy dogs, but nothing on their kids. The kids could starve, but the dogs were mighty fine. You know, it just, where's your heart? Not even in her own flesh and blood, but in these things, other things she takes pleasure in pampering dogs. You know, a parent who will spend freely on all of his wants and nothing on the child's needs. What is he proving? What he treasures most. You know, it speaks there in James about the cry of those who are suffering, those who were robbed of their basic need to make someone else rich. That the father or those abusers, they can shut their eyes to the cries, but James 5 and verse 4 says, the cries of the hurting reach the ears of the Father. Just amazing. Think about that family we do in Orange and other cases as well. When it's all about, in any case, when it's all about what I want to the neglect of someone else's needs, the Father hears that cry. I want to ask another question. Which of these negative commands matters? And can we choose to do one but not both? We know from Old Testament and New that you shall not kill, or as Jesus says in the Beatitudes, you shall not murder. Or Matthew chapter 5, verse 19. And then Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19, do not store up treasures for yourself on earth. Can we pick one, and which one matters? Now we would reason that Matthew 5:19, do not murder, would be more important than 6:19. But the point is, being careless in either one, by being careless in either one, we might be condemned. Yes, Joe?
Where was the one that you were talking about, God hears?
Oh, that was in James.
Oh, James 5, verse 4.
That's in James.
Okay, thanks.
And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord. Those who've been abused. You know, the rich folks can ignore that. Or the parent that neglects the child can, you know, shut their ears to the cry. But it reaches the ear of the Lord. Now, again, it's not that Christ is forbidding laying up altogether. Because even the Apostle Paul said that parents are to save up for our children. In 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 14, that parents are to store up or to save for our children. What's he talking about? What's he mean by save up or store up for the children? He's not talking about leaving them a big fat monetary inheritance after we die, but enough to provide for them day to day for a time when the father might not be able to provide. And so what's good stewardship? Planning for the contingency. Planning an emergency fund. That's simply good stewardship. Whether our kids ever have a big inheritance, don't listen so that you don't. You know, what is important? Good stewardship to provide for my children day by day, and if I were not able to provide for them when they were young, then to have enough that they would be well cared. And so, he's not forbidding laying up some money. It's just the excess. And so we see in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8, it is a priority that we must prepare for our home. It is in the whole realm of discipline. Bodily discipline is only, that's the wrong chapter. Chapter 5, verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those in his household, he is denied the faith and worse than an unbeliever. And so, yes, that's just good stewardship. But what is Jesus forbidding them? He's forbidding the excessive seeking after things. I mean, too much interest in this present world, too much confidence in money, too much collecting of the world's good, and doing so for our own comfort and satisfaction. I guess that rules out our collecting all those old cars, doesn't it? I mean, too much of it. Nothing wrong with having some. I mean, like I said, the other day I found one online. Yeah, that'd be a neat old car to have.
It was too big for the cardboard.
Well, that's a different matter.
Wow. It was really cool, but yeah, it didn't fit on cardboard.
Why in the big picture, though, is Jesus forbidding having too much of anything? Takes us back to Solomon's wisdom. Takes us back to Proverbs 30 and verse 9. What's the prayer? Lord, don't give me too much or too little. What's the problem with too much? Proverbs 30 and verse 9. That I may not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? It's quite the proverb when you consider it. If you have enough to forget who the Lord is, you've already forgotten everybody else, haven't you? I mean, anybody else who may have a need, you hadn't thought about them forever if you have forgotten who the Lord is. And the purpose of remembering who the Lord is what? To be mindful of the one who gave us the ability to make the money, who gave us the means to make the money. I was reading the words of a psychologist. Sometimes we think a psychologist wouldn't have any much to say good about religion. Carl Menninger connected this religious conviction of giving to our mental health. And when your ladies are getting ready to study that book, Telling Yourself the Truth, and this is very much in line with that mindset. He says, money giving is a very good criterion, in a way, of a person's mental health. Generous people are rarely mentally ill people. And I spent some time trying to think of somebody that was generous, that wasn't also mentally ill. Can't think of it. The most generous people are mentally healthy. Can you think of anyone who practices hospitality and benevolence, like in the sense of the Samaritan who took care of the man that was injured by the roadside, who's not mentally well off? I couldn't think of any, but I could sure think of plenty of folks who are still seeking more money and more power with their money, who are frankly mentally unhinged. And I worked for 3 of them.
And they were crazier than all 3 of them.
They would do anything illegal and consider themselves holy in doing it, and abuse it. They were really unhinged. That's not healthy. What'd you have to do?
Well, it's true, because you think about someone who says that they've done this, or this is for somebody, or they've done whatever, but then it's like, they'll have that you owe me attitude, or they'll complain about how come that person doesn't appreciate or return the favor.
Or doesn't do what they say to do.
Yeah, so I'm thinking when he's in the scripture it says, if you're don't expect it back. If you're going to go 2 miles, it's basically, once it's gone, don't expect anything, because the more you dwell on it, and like you said, then you start thinking, You'll start thinking the wrong thoughts. Or
It's no longer benevolence, but it's control.
Right, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, I did this for you, so I get to tell you what to do.
And then they get, I guess, because it's like, it puts you in a really, like you're saying, a really unhealthy mindset.
It really is. I was thinking about actually my mom's aunt and uncle. These people lived and died essentially as malnourished hermits. And after they died, we found out they had $1.4 million in cash.
And their checking account.
You know, this, and there was,
Told their kids
Nothing
they
happened.
couldn't borrow when they needed something. Told their kids, oh, we can't help you, you don't have any money.
one of the cousins' house burned down. They needed a little money to build a house and get it restarted again. Oh, no, we can't do that. You know,
Remember your mother flipping out.
but, you know, because of laying up more treasure in temporary things on earth, what's really the problem with that? If that's where your treasure is, your heart is, how does it make you mentally ill? Because if that's where your treasure is, every bit of bad news says, I'm going to lose it all, doesn't it? Every bit of news threatens you.
They were so miserable to be around them. It was depressing, and there was never any good news or anything to smile about. And it's just so sad to think they live that kind of existence. Not that the money would have made them happy, but if they had had the attitude of being generous with it, I think their whole outlook would have been so much brighter.
And if it was, look at Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. It doesn't mean that when you give it or hoard it, that everything's going to be all good or all bad. But when things go wrong, it's not going to be that bad. I mean, you have a better outlook on it. Colossians 3, verse 1. Therefore, if you've been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above. I've got too many notes there to read. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are on the earth. For if you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God.
That's the key right there.
And so, if your life is hidden in God, what's it mean? He's going to provide all you need. He's going to protect you. He's going to preserve you. He's going to prosper you as you have need. And it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. And so, our actions are really proving where our heart is. And God, no doubt, is taking evidence from our heart. God will then be rich towards us. When we started this study, it's not just the requirement that we be good stewards and that we give, but God's trying to give to us, isn't He? He really is. He's trying to do good, something good for us. He will then be rich towards us, and I don't mean in the denominational TV preacher sense, but He's trying to be rich towards us. Look at Luke chapter 12 and verse 21. Luke chapter 12 and verse 21. What's the problem? On the other hand, the man who stores up treasure for himself is not rich towards God, but those who give. Verse 22, look at the mental health, the balance of this mindset. For this reason, I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you will put on. No. Your life is hidden in God. So don't worry about that. He's going to be all right. He's going to take care of all of that. The words there, the one who is not rich towards God, in effect mean that we are robbing God. We're robbing God. In legal terms, if you would turn with me to Malachi chapter 3 and verse 8. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 8. Here's the question. Will a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings? Legalistically, they were not robbing him of tithes. What they were robbing him of is his offerings. You see, there's a difference.
It's a sacrifice. The tithe is, if it's not a sacrifice, it's not really.
Once you've given, if you've given what is required, you really haven't then freely offered anything, have you? If you've just taken care of what's legally required. The freely offered part comes from the proportion of the whole income. That's liberality. You can never define liberality as giving only what's required. Liberality comes from the whole of your income. Now, recently someone said to me, here, Paul, here's my tithe for next Sunday. They're going to be out of town. I wish I hadn't taken it. Because that's not what it is. It's a portion we've determined to give from the whole. Yes, Jim?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I was reading in Jeremiah chapter 3 in verse 10. And it said, yet in spite of all this, her treacherous sister Judah did not return to me with all her heart, but rather in deception, declares the Lord.
Just a part that came back with it. Just a part. We want the benefits from you, God, but we don't want to give ourselves to you. We can't give too much to you. We want all that comes. Isn't that still the mindset?
So, yeah, so it's like that, wow, you're thinking about deception like that, you know? You can fool yourself.
Yeah.
That's the scary part.
Yeah, it really is. The sense that oh, I've come to you, I've given you all of this. You know, you got to be pleased. You owe me everything now, God, don't you? You know, that mindset.
It's kind of
I deserve to be increased.
It's like the mindset, Mary Lou told me about someone that she knew, that she'd been talking to about God. And she said, well, I'm a good person, and if God can't see all the good things I've done and all the things I've given to poor people, then that's just too bad, and I just don't want any part of it. How do you combat that kind of mindset? I mean, that's so...
Well, it does go back to that point I made earlier. Giving connected with mental health, spiritual health as well. And anytime you say, well, I gave and now I am owed, that's no way that's healthy. There's just no way that's healthy. You know, again, as I've talked about in the past, if we give just what was required, the mindset is then all the rest is mine. It's not it, is it? No. The mindset of a Christian is, it all belongs to God and none of it's mine. It's none of it's mine. It is really to deny who gave you, again, I mentioned it earlier, to deny who gave you the ability to gain the income. Again, the spirit of liberality is, since it's all from God, none of it's mine. I mentioned earlier, seeing the old car, that I thought, yeah, I could have that. But, as I typically do, I could rationalize, well, doesn't cost near as much as a new one. But to have it is really a liberality toward myself, isn't it? Because it's what I would want. That's being liberal towards self and not towards God. Talking about money speaking. Did you have something?
Well, yeah, I was just talking to someone today, and they were going over the prodigal son, and they said that they had done a study on it recently, and I haven't checked this out for myself, but they said that prodigal doesn't mean rebellious. It means wastefulness. And when you
Which
look
is
at-
exactly what he was.
And so when you look at that, like what you're talking about tonight, he demanded his inheritance that he thought it was his, and he wasted it, right? But then he realized, he came back to realizing where it wasn't his, really.
So prodigal would be selfishness, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and she said prodigal meant wastefulness. And so I thought, that kind of puts a different spin on the whole prodigal son story, to me, anyways.
But, he was intent on laying up treasure just for the pleasures of his life. Wasted it all. And that selfishness. Selfishness and humility do not go together. You think about those who are selfish, like the prodigal. Give it to me now. I want it now. Because it's all about me, which means it's all about pride. The selfish person can never, he can be humiliated, but of his own will not become humble. Until what? Like the prodigal. Until he comes to his senses. Money speaks of what we are. I mean, you think about the love of money, it's one of the root causes that the Pharisees participated in the betrayal and the crucifixion of Jesus. Money spoke of who they are, just as it did of Judas. That selfish desire for money, and in their case, protecting at any cost their high positions over the Jewish people, well, it warped them mentally. Those were not healthy people. It warped them in their desire, in their values, and what they sought for themselves. And as long as greed controlled them, again, they could never humble themselves. It just doesn't go together. It can't go together. Selfishness is, in fact, the opposite of humility. Which is why Jesus asked, what's the question? What shall it profit a man? That's the question. Selfishness versus humility. What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world, forfeits his soul or his life? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? It says who you are. It testifies. It gives witness to your very soul, doesn't it? This is my soul. I want it all. I deserve it all. God, you owe it all to me. No. And not even a matter at all. Sometimes people will exchange it for so little. And if it's of this world, even if it appears great, it's still very little. It's all passing away. Your money speaks of the depth of faith and the breadth of your love. Doesn't it? Money speaks to the depth of your faith and the breadth of your love. Look at James chapter 2, verse 15. James chapter 2, verse 15. Interesting, we're going back to James again because he has a lot to say to rich people who despise poor people. James 2, verse 15. If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Even so, faith. Meaning in like manner, your faith is like working like this. Even so, faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. There's no depth of faith there, is it? As to the breadth of your love, how does our stewardship give witness in that? 1 John. 1 John chapter 3, verse 17. Whoever has the world's good and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? It doesn't, does it? It doesn't. I'm going to need to wind this down in a moment. All right, brother. Money speaks of where you're going. It speaks of who you are, or what you are. It speaks of the depth of our love and the breadth, or the depth of our faith and the breadth of our love. And it speaks to the direction that we are going. We're going. Think about Judas Iscariot. Despite giving all the money back, the sorrow which resulted in death. Acts chapter 1 and verse 25 says he still has his own place. It's where he's going. Ananias and Sapphira, by lying about what they were truly given, their graves still hold their souls for that day of condemnation. Well, again, money does speak loudly. Often tells you to buy it, as I experienced this week. When somebody's about to steal it from you, it screams. And it brought to my mind this question. If money was screaming at me when somebody was stealing it, does it speak as loudly to my desire to freely give it then? It ought to speak just as loudly. Hope that's beneficial.